Herodotus Histories, Part 4. Deioces had a son, Herodotus, who inherited the throne at Deioces' death after a reign of 53 years. Having so inherited, he was not content to rule the Medes alone. Marching against the Persians, he attacked them first, and they were the first whom he made subject to the Medes. Then, with these two strong nations at his back, he subdued one nation of Asia after another, till he marched against the Assyrians, to wit, those of the Assyrians who held Ninus. These had formerly been rulers of all, but now their allies had dropped from them, and they were left alone, yet in themselves a prosperous people. Marching then against these Assyrians, Herodotus himself and the greater part of his army perished, after he had reigned 22 years. So at this time the Assyrian Empire is in decline. If you recall earlier, Herodotus mentioned how he had seen all of these nations who were formerly great become small, and nations that were formerly small, had become great. So he's drawn that connection to this circle of ascent and then descent for these different empires and nations. At his death he was succeeded by his son Cyaxares. He is said to have been a much greater warrior than his father. It was he who first arrayed the men of Asia in companies, and set each kind in bands apart, the spearmen and the archers and the horsemen. Before this they were all blended alike confusedly together. This was the king who fought against the Lydians when the day was turned to night in the battle, and who united under his dominion all Asia that is beyond the river Halys. Collecting all his subjects, he marched against Ninus, wishing to avenge his father and destroy the city. He defeated the Assyrians in battle, but while he was besieging their city, there came down upon him a great army of Scythians, led by their king Magi, son of Protothees. These had invaded Asia after they had driven the Cimmerians out of Europe. Pursuing them in their flight, the Scythians came to the Median country. So if you remember, the Scythians were those guys who lived up north of the mountains, north of Iran, in the region that's modern-day Ukraine, and that whole Caspian Sea region, the Pontic steppe, and these were horse warriors, so now they're descending upon the Persians and into the Middle East. It is 30 days' journey for an unburdened man from the Maetian lake to the river Phasis and the land of the Colchi. From the Colchi it is an easy matter to cross into Media. There is but one nation between, the Saspores. To pass these is to be in Media. Nevertheless, it was not by this way that the Scythians entered. They turned aside and came by the upper and much longer road, having on their right the Caucasian mountains. There the Medes met the Scythians, who worsted them in battle and deprived them of their rule, and made themselves masters of all Asia. So these nomadic horse warrior archers from the north, the Scythians, at one point, once again, briefly conquered the Persians and became the masters of Asia. Thence they marched against Egypt, and when they were in the part of Syria called Palestine, Psammetichus, king of Egypt, met them and persuaded them with gifts and prayers to come no farther. So they turned back, and when they came on their way to the city of Ascalon in Syria, most of the Scythians passed by and did no harm, but a few remained behind and plundered the temple of heavenly Aphrodite. This temple, as I learn from what I hear, is the oldest of all the temples of the goddess, for the temple in Cyprus was founded from it, as the Cyprians themselves say, and the temple on Cythera was founded by Phoenicians, from the same land of Syria. But the Scythians who pillaged the temple, and all their descendants after them, were afflicted by the goddess with the female sickness, insomuch that the Scythians say that this is the cause of their disease, and that those who come to Scythia can see there the plight of the men whom they call Enares. So this temple would have been a Phoenician or a Philistine temple at Ascalon, and probably the temple to the goddess Atargatis, which you can see a statue of her over here. She was regarded as a half-human, half-fish sort of mermaid-type goddess, but also a goddess of love and procreation and all these things. So a fertility goddess. And because the Scythians decided to plunder this, they were punished by the goddess with this disease, which probably refers to a kind of genetic disorder of the reproductive organs. This class of men that he references would have been basically infertile and with indistinct reproductive organs. So they viewed this as a punishment of the goddess. The Scythians then ruled Asia for 28 years, and all the land was wasted by reason of their violence and their pride. For besides that they extracted from each the tribute which was laid upon him, they rode about the land carrying off all men's possessions. The greater number of them were entertained and made drunk, and then slain by Cyaxares and the Medes. So thus the Medes won back their empire, and all that they had formerly possessed. They took Ninus, in what matter I will show in a later part of my history, and brought all Assyria, except the province of Babylon, under their rule. All right, so for 28 years, these Scythians are just running amok, and they're obviously not interested in actually ruling an empire. They just want to defeat all their opponents, and then they want to plunder and have a good time. And that ends up undoing them. So they have their day in the sun for a little while, robbing people, plundering, but eventually Cyaxares and the Medes are able to use their vice against them to get them drunk and then to kill them. And so once again, the Medes take possession of that whole region of the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent. Afterwards, Cyaxares died after a reign of 40 years, among which I count the years of the Scythian domination, and his son Astiaghis reigned in his stead. Astiaghis had a daughter, whom he called Mandane, concerning whom he had a dream, that enough water flowed from her to fill his city and overflow all Asia. He imparted this vision to those of the Magi who interpreted dreams, and when he heard what they told him, he was terrified. And presently, Mandane, being now of marriageable age, he feared the vision too much to give her to any Median worthy to mate with his family, but wedded her to a Persian called Cambyses, a man whom he knew to be well-born and of a quiet temper, for Astiaghis held Cambyses to be much lower than a Mede of middle estate. So he has this vision which is interpreted, a dream vision, which he gives to the Magi to interpret. You might think to the book of Daniel. That's a common motif throughout Daniel as well. That's what the Magi do. They're astrologers and they're dream interpreters. But according to the book of Daniel, they're actually not very good dream interpreters often. But in this case, they give him the interpretation of this vision about his daughter. And so Astiaghis is concerned that his daughter is going to give birth to a man who's going to overthrow him and take over his empire. And so he doesn't want to wed her to one of the Median nobles, the nobles of the Medes, because they are the dominant people. And so he thinks he's going to be safe by wedding her to Cambyses, who's a Persian. Now remember, the Medes had conquered the Persians. The Persians were a subject, a tributary people. Even though Cambyses is a nobleman among the Persians, he views him as lower. His offspring's not going to be a threat. But in the first year of Mandane's marriage to Cambyses, Astiaghis saw a second vision. He dreamt that there grew from his daughter a vine, which covered the whole of Asia. Having seen this vision and imparted it to the interpreters of dreams, he sent to the Persians for his daughter, then near her time, and when she came, kept her guarded, desiring to kill whatever child she might bear. For the interpreters declared that the meaning of this dream was that his daughter's offspring should rule in his place. Wishing to prevent this, Astiaghis, on the birth of Cyrus, summoned to him a man of his household called Harpagus, who was his faithfulest servant among the Medes, and was steward of all his possessions. Then he said, "Do not mishandle this command of mine, Harpagus, nor forsake me for the service of others, lest hereafter it be the worse for yourself. Take the boy whom Mandane has borne, and carry him to your house and kill him, and then bury him in what manner you yourself will." "King," Harpagus answered, "never yet have you seen me do aught unpleasing to you, and I will ever be careful not to offend against you. But if it is your will that this should so be done, then it behooves that for my part I render you fitting service." Thus answered Harpagus. The child was then given to him, adorned for its death, and he went to his house weeping. When he came in, he told his wife all the command given him by Astiaghis. "Now, therefore," said she to him, "what purpose you to do?" "Not," he answered, "to obey Astiaghis' behest. No, not though he lose his wits and be more frantic than now he is. Even so I myself will not serve his purpose, nor be his instrument for such a murder. There are many reasons why I will not kill this child. He is akin to myself, and further, Astiaghis is old, and has no male issue. Now if after his death the sovereignty passes to this daughter of his, whose son he is now using me to slay, what is left for me but the greatest of all dangers? Nay, for my safety I must see that the boy dies, but the deed must be done by some one of Astiaghis' own men, and not of mine." So this is once again one of those no-win situations, very much like the choice that Kandali's wife gave to Gyges. Either kill the king or kill yourself. And so now Astiaghis is giving Harpagus this command: kill the son who is destined to rule all of Asia, or you yourself be killed. So he's trying to find his way out of this, and he believes the king's command must be carried out, but he himself is not willing to do it. So he's going to try to offload that responsibility to one of Astiaghis' men. So saying, he sent forthwith a messenger to that one of Astiaghis' cowherds, whom he knew to pasture his herds in the likeliest places, and where the mountains were most haunted of wild beasts. This man's name was Mithridates, and his wife was a slave like him. Her name was in the Greek language Kaino, in the Median Spako, for Spax is the Median name for a dog. The foothills of the mountains where this cowherd pastured his kine are to the north of Ecbatana, towards the Euxine Sea, for the rest of Media is everywhere a level plain. But here on the side of the Cesperes the land is very high and mountainous and covered with woods. So when the cowherd came with all speed at the summons, Harpagus said, Astiaghis bids you to take this child and lay it in the most desolate part of the mountains, that it may thus perish as soon as may be. And he bids me say that if you kill not the child, but in any way save it alive, you shall die a terrible death, and it is I who am ordered to see it exposed. So in good pagan fashion, Harpagus thinks that he can avoid the crime of murdering this child, even though he's still seeing it done. He's just simply going to offload it to a different man who is himself going to do the deed. But he's ordering him to leave the child exposed. So he's basically just giving over the child to someone else to give over the child, thinking that thereby he will avoid the personal debt of this deed. Hearing this, the cowherd took up the child and returned by the same way and came to his steading. Now it chanced that his wife too had been expecting her time every day, and Providence so ordained that she was brought to bed while her man was away in the city. Each of them was anxious for the other, the husband being afraid about his wife's travail, and the wife because she knew not why Harpagus had so unwontedly sent for her husband. So when he returned and came to her, she was startled by the unexpected sight, and asked him before he could speak why Harpagus had so instantly summoned him. Wife, he said, when I came to the city I saw and heard what I would I had never seen, and what I would had never happened to our masters. All the house of Harpagus was full of weeping, and I was astonished and entered in. And immediately I saw a child laid there and struggling and crying, decked out with gold and many-colored raiment. And when Harpagus saw me, he bade me take the child with all speed, and bear it away, and lay it where there are the most wild beasts in the mountains. It was Astiaghis, he said, who laid this command on me, and Harpagus threatened me grievously if I did not do his will. So I took up the child and bore him away, supposing him to be the child of someone in the household, for I could never have guessed whose he was. But I was amazed at seeing him decked with gold and raiment, and at hearing moresoever the manifest sound of weeping in the house of Harpagus. Very soon on the way I heard all the story from a servant, who brought me out of the city and gave the child into my charge, to wit, that it was the son of Mandane, the king's daughter, and Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, and that Astiaghis bade him slay the child. And now here is the child. And with that the cowherd uncovered it and showed it. But when the woman saw how fine and fair the child was, she fell a-weeping, and laid hold of the man's knees, and entreated him by no means to expose him. But the husband said he could do no other, for, he said, there would be coming spies from Harpagus to see what was done, and he must die a terrible death if he did not obey. So then, being unable to move her husband, the woman said next, Since I cannot move you from your purpose to expose, then do you do this, if needs must that a child be seen exposed. Know that I too have borne a child, but it was dead. Take it now, and lay it out. But for the child of the daughter of Astiaghis, let us rear it as if it were our own. So shall you escape punishment for offending against our masters, and we shall have taken no evil counsel. For the child that is dead will have a royal burial, and he that is alive will not lose his life. So by happy coincidence, the wife here is offering a way out of this dilemma. You don't need to kill this innocent child, or else be killed yourself. And this decision, this counsel, ends up changing the course of history. Thinking that his wife counseled him exceeding well in his present strait, the cowherd straightway did as she said. He gave his wife the child whom he had brought to kill him, and his own dead child he put into the chest, wherein he carried the other. and decked it with all the other child's adornment, and laid it out in the most desolate part of the mountains. Then on the third day after the laying out of the child, the cowherd left one of his herdsmen to guard it, and went to the city, where he came to Harpagus' house, and said he was ready to show the child's dead body. Harpagus sent the most trusty of his bodyguard, and these saw for him and buried the cowherd's child. So it was buried, and the cowherd's wife took and reared the boy, who was afterwards named Cyrus. But she gave him not that, but some other name. Okay, so in other words, Cyrus is his actual name. That's not the name that these peasants gave him while they were raising him. Now when the boy was 10 years old, it was revealed in some such wise as this who he was. He was playing in the village where these herdsmen quarters were. There he was playing in the road with others of his age. The boys in their play chose for their king the one who passed for the son of the cowherd, Cyrus in other words. Then he set them severally to their tasks, some to building of houses, some to be his bodyguard, one, as I suppose, to be the king's eye. To another he gave the right of bringing him messages. To each he gave his proper work. Now one of these boys who played with him was son to Artembares, a notable Median. As he did not obey the command Cyrus gave him, Cyrus bade the other boys seize him, and when they did so he dealt very roughly with the boy, and scourged him. As soon as he was loosed, very angry at the wrong done to him, he went down to his father in the city and complained of what he had met with at the hands of the son of Astiaghis, Cowherd, not calling him Cyrus, for that name had not yet been given. Artembares went with his anger fresh upon him to Astiaghis, bringing his son and telling of the cruel usage he had. "O king," said he, "see the outrage done to us by the son of your slave, the son of a cowherd." And with that he showed his son's shoulders. So in this passage, it's telling us about the young life of Cyrus, and it points out that even as a boy, he was blessed with the gift of leadership and good management. And if you ever read Xenophon's work, Oikonomikos, he basically discusses Cyrus as a model for how to properly run a kingdom. He sets everything in order. He has his ministers. He distributes his tasks. He oversees. And he tolerates no disobedience. So in the ancient world, Cyrus was viewed by friends and foe alike as a very able and powerful ruler. And this goes all the way back to his childhood here. So again, this sort of Greek idea that these kingly qualities have very much to do with birthright. You are born into it. It's not just anybody who can become king, like with the story of Gyges and Candales. When Astiaghis heard and saw, he was ready to avenge the boy in justice to Artembares' rank. So he sent for the cowherd and his son. When they were both present, Astiaghis said, fixing his eyes on Cyrus, "Is it you, then, the son of such a father, who have dared to deal so despitefully with the son of the greatest of my courtiers?" "Nay, master," answered Cyrus, "what I did to him I did with justice. The boys of the village, of whom he was one, chose me in their play to be their king, for they thought me the fittest to rule. The other boys did then as I bid them. But this one was disobedient, and cared nothing for me till he got his deserts. So now if I deserve punishment for this, here I am to take it." So imagine being a 10-year-old boy brought into the presence of this Median king and challenged for something which was probably not only a crime, but even verging on sacrilege for the child of a cowherd to attack a nobleman's son in this way. And listen to the courage and honesty with which Cyrus speaks. While he spoke, it seemed to Astiaghis that he recognized Cyrus. The fashion of the boy's countenance was like, he thought, to his own, and his manner of answering was freer than customary, and the time of the exposure seemed to agree with Cyrus's age. Being thereby astonished, he sat a while silent, but when at last with difficulty he could collect his wits, he said, for he desired to rid himself of Artembares and question the cowherd with none present, "I will so act, Artembares, that you and your son shall have no cause of complaint." So he sent Artembares away, and the servants led Cyrus within at Astiaghis' bidding. Then the cowherd, being left quite alone, Astiaghis asked him whence he had got the boy, and from whose hands. The cowherd answered that Cyrus was his own son, and that the mother was still in his house. "You are ill-advised," said Astiaghis, "desiring as you do to find yourself in a desperate strait." And with that he made a sign to the guard to seize him. Then, under stress of necessity, the cowherd declared to him all the story, telling all truly as it happened from the beginning, and at the last he prayed and entreated that the king would pardon him. So going back to the judgment on Cyrus, when the king challenges him for treating the son of Artembares in this way, and Cyrus shoots back, I did this with justice because I was the king and he would not obey me, so I punished him. And that was essentially challenging the king. That was putting the king in the position like, you're the king. What would you do if somebody disobeyed your command? You understand how this works. You can't rule if people don't obey you. And so now Astiaghis recognizes Cyrus, or at least he suspects. He bears a resemblance to him, and his answer resonated in some way with him. He can discern that kingly element in Cyrus. And so he pressures the cowherd and gets the full story. When the truth had been so declared, Astiaghis took thereafter less account of the cowherd, but he was very wroth with Harpagus, and bade the guards summon him. Harpagus came, and Astiaghis asked him, Harpagus, in what manner did you kill the boy, my daughter's son, whom I gave you? Harpagus saw the cowherd in the house, and did not take the way of falsehood, lest he should be caught and confuted. O king, he said, when I took the boy, I thought and considered how should I do your pleasure, and not offend against you, yet not be held a murderer by your daughter or yourself. This then I did. I called to me yonder cowherd, and gave over the child to him, telling him that it was you who gave the command to kill it. And that was the truth, for such was your command. But I gave the child with the charge that the cowherd should lay it on a desolate mountainside, and wait there and watch till it be dead. And I threatened him with all punishments if he did not accomplish this. Then, when he had done what he was bid, and the child was dead, I sent the trustiest of my eunuchs, and by them I saw and buried the body. This, O king, is the tale of the matter, and such was the end of the boy. So Harpagus spoke the plain truth. Astiaghis hid the anger that he had against him for what had been done. And first he related the story again to Harpagus, as he had heard it from the cowherd. Then, after so repeating it, he made an end by saying that the boy was alive, and good had come of it all. For, so he said in his speech, I was greatly afflicted by what had been done to this boy, and it weighed heavily on me that I was estranged from my daughter. Now, therefore, in this lucky turn of fortune, send your own son to the boy who is newly come, and come hither to dine with me, for I am about to make sacrifice for the safety of my grandson to the gods to whom this honor is due. So Astiaghis hears both stories. He finds out that Harpagus, he didn't exactly lie to him. Harpagus did not know what had happened, but he did not accomplish his command. He's not even worried about the cowherd. He's worried about Harpagus, who is his trusted minister. And so he suppresses his anger against Harpagus, and he tells him, well, this is a happy thing. I ended up kind of regretting that whole thing about killing my grandson. So go ahead and bring your own son to the palace, and we'll have a big feast, and I'll sacrifice to the gods for my grandson. When Harpagus heard this, he did obeisance, and went to his home, greatly pleased to find that his offense had served the needful end, and that he was invited to dinner in honor of this fortunate day. Coming in, he bade his only son, a boy of about 13 years of age, to go to Astiaghis' palace and do whatever the king commanded, and in his great joy he told his wife all that had happened. But when Harpagus' son came, Astiaghis cut his throat, and tearing him limb from limb, roasted some, and boiled some of the flesh, and the work being finished, kept all in readiness. So when it came to the hour for dinner, and Harpagus was present among the rest of the guests, dishes of sheep's flesh were set before Astiaghis and the others, but Harpagus was served with the flesh of his own son, all but the head and hands and feet, which lay apart, covered up in a basket. And when Harpagus seemed to have eaten his fill, Astiaghis asked him, Are you pleased with your meal, Harpagus? Exceedingly well pleased, Harpagus answered. Then those whose business it was brought him in the covered basket the head and hands and feet of his son, and they stood before Harpagus, and bade him uncover, and take of them what he would. Harpagus did so. He uncovered and saw what was left of his son. This he saw, but he mastered himself, and was not dismayed. Astiaghis asked him, Know you what beast's flesh you have eaten? Yes, he said, I know, and all that the king does is pleasing to me. With that answer he took the rest of the flesh and went to his house, purposing then, as I suppose, to collect and bury all. So Astiaghis really ups the notch here for savagery. He feeds Harpagus' own son to him, and Harpagus keeps himself under control, but this is going to set other things in motion that are going to reverberate down through history as well. Thus did Astiaghis punish Harpagus. But, to aid him to resolve about Cyrus, he called to him the same Magians who had interpreted his dreams, as I have said, and when they came, Astiaghis asked them how they had interpreted his vision. They answered as before, and said that the boy must have been made king had he lived and not died first. Then said Astiaghis, "The boy is saved and alive, and when he was living in the country the boys of his village made him king, and did duly all that is done by true kings, for he assigned to each severally the places of bodyguards and sentinels and messengers and all else, and so ruled. And to what, think you, does this tend? If the boy is alive, said the Magians, and has been made king without foreknowledge, then fear not for aught that he can do but keep a good heart. He will not be made king a second time. Know that even in our prophecies it is often a small thing that has been foretold, and the perfect fulfillment of the dream is but a trifling matter." "I too, you Magians," said Astiaghis, "am much of your mind, that the dream came true when the boy was called king, and that I have no more to fear from him. Nevertheless, consider well and advise me what shall be safest both for my house and for you." The Magians said, "King, we too are much concerned that your sovereignty should stand, for in the other case it goes away from your nation to this boy who is a Persian, and so we Medes are enslaved and deemed by no account by the Persians, being as we are of another blood. But while you are established king, who are our countrymen, we have our share of power, and great honor is paid us by you. Thus, then, it behoves us by all means to take thought for you and your sovereignty. And at the present time, if we saw any danger, we would declare it to you. But now the dream has had but a trifling end, and we ourselves have confidence in counsel. You should be like-minded. As for this boy, send him away from your sight to the Persians and to his parents." So Astiaghis is still concerned about Cyrus, so he summons the Magi again, the dream interpreters, and kind of double checks with them. "What do you think about this dream? Remember that dream I had where the vine spreads all over Asia and this boy is going to become a king?" And they said, yes, that would be true. If the boy was still alive and hadn't been killed, he would have been made king. And then he tells them, well, he is still alive. And not only that, but the other boys in the village elected him as king. In their games, they chose him to be the king, and he actually ruled like a king. He divvied up all these tasks and everything like that. And so the Magi are thinking, well, you've seen by now how oracles tend to work with the gods. There's these little riddles and stuff like that. And these dreams are the same way. The Magi said, well, that's probably what the dream was about. Oftentimes these dreams seem like they might be, these small details in dreams are really big things, or big things in dreams are actually small details. So maybe the dream was just that he would be chosen as king by his playmates. And Astiaghis says, well, yeah, I kind of think the same thing, but they counsel him to send the boy away anyway. You don't want a threat to the throne that close to the power, because remember, Cyrus was not a Mede, he was a Persian. And the Magi are one of the tribes of the Medes, according to Herodotus. So they're very concerned that a Mede should stay on the throne. They don't want to lose their position of prominence and rule over the Persians. So they counsel him to send Cyrus back to the Persians and his parents. Hearing this, Astiaghis was glad, and calling Cyrus, "My lad," he said, "I did you wrong by reason of the vision I had in a dream. That meant naught, but by your own destiny you still live. Now, therefore, get you to the Persians, and good luck go with you. I will send those that shall guide you. When you are there, you shall find a father and mother of other estate than Mithridates the cowherd and his wife." So said Astiaghis, and sent Cyrus away. When he returned to Cambyses' house, his parents received him there, and learning who he was, they welcomed him heartily, for they supposed that long ago he had straightway been killed, and they asked him how his life had been saved. Then he told them and said that till now he had known nothing, but been greatly deceived, but that on the way he had heard all the story of his misfortune. For he had thought, he said, that Astiaghis Cowherd was his father, but in his journey from the city his escort had told him all the tale. And he had been reared, he said, by the cowherd's wife, and was full of her praises, and in his tale he was ever speaking of Kaino. Hearing this name, his parents set about a story that Cyrus, when exposed, was suckled by a bitch, thinking thereby to make the story of his saving seem the more marvelous to the Persians. Okay, so the cowherd's wife's name was Kaino, which in Greek is basically their word for dog. So his parents, they started spreading the story by a play on words that when he was exposed in the wild, Cyrus was saved and suckled by a dog to make his survival like a marvel, like the will of the gods. If you know anything about Roman history, that should ring a bell to you. That's very much like the story of Romulus and Remus, who, as little infants, were suckled by a she-wolf. So this idea that nature itself is preserving this child. He's born to be a king. He's shown that with his playmates. The truth comes out. He has the royal destiny on him, and even nature itself is at his service. So this is all kind of building the legend of Cyrus. This then was the beginning of that legend. But as Cyrus grew to man's estate, being the manliest and best loved of his peers, Harpagus courted him and sent him gifts, wishing to be avenged on Astiaghis, for he saw no hope of a private man like himself punishing Astiaghis. But as he saw Cyrus growing up, he sought to make him an ally, for he likened Cyrus's misfortune to his own. He had already brought matters so far that, since Astiaghis dealt harshly with the Medians, he consorted with each of the chief Medians and persuaded them to make Cyrus their leader and depose Astiaghis. So much being ready and done, Harpagus desired to make known his intent to Cyrus, then dwelling among the Persians. But the roads were guarded, and he had no plan for sending a message but this. He artfully slit the belly of a hare, and then leaving it, as it were, without further harm, he put into it a paper on which he wrote what he thought fit. Then he sewed up the hare's belly and sent it to Persia by the trustiest of his servants, giving him nets to carry as if he were a huntsman. The messenger was charged to give Cyrus the hare, and bid him by word of mouth cut it open with his own hands, none other being present. So Harpagus sets out to get his revenge on Astiaghis. He begins fomenting unrest. He begins creating a network of traitors, a network of people who are unsatisfied with Astiaghis' harshness, which we saw demonstrated in the feast. And so even among the Medes, there are noblemen who would like to get rid of him. And so Harpagus thinks that Cyrus will help him. And so he starts putting Cyrus's name out there privately among these people who are unsatisfied with Astiaghis, saying, we should make Cyrus the king. And when he feels he has everything ready, then he sends a message to Cyrus in secret, hidden inside the skin of this rabbit, in order to get him on board and start the rebellion against Astiaghis. All this was done. Cyrus took the hare and slit it, and read the paper which was in it. The writing was as follows. Son of Cambyses, seeing that the gods watch over you, for else you had not so prospered, do you now avenge yourself on Astiaghis, your murderer, for according to his intent you are dead. It is by the gods' doing, and mine, that you live. Methinks you have long ago heard the story of what was done concerning yourself, and how Astiaghis entreated me, because I slew you not, but gave you to the cowherd. If then you will be counseled by me, you shall rule all the country which is now ruled by Astiaghis. Persuade the Persians to rebel, and lead their army against the Medes. Then you have your desire, whether I be appointed to command the army against you, or some other notable man among the Medians. For they will of themselves revolt from Astiaghis and join you, and endeavor to pull him down. Seeing then that all here is ready, do as I say, and do it quickly. So notice Harpagus's approach here. He's basically kind of subtly taking credit for saving Cyrus's life, even though he really didn't. He was essentially either too much of a coward or too morally conflicted to do the job himself. So he gave it to someone else and said, here, I can't do it, you do it. But he actually did think that he killed Cyrus. But now he's saying, like, it's because of me and the gods that you survived. Therefore, listen to my counsel. Everything's ready for you. Go get the Persians to rebel, and when you get here, don't even worry about the army that's going to come meet you, because it's either going to be led by me, or it's going to be led by some other Median who is also planning to rebel against Astiaghis. So raise your forces, come march against the Medes, and do it quickly. When Cyrus heard this, he considered how most cunningly he might persuade the Persians to revolt. And this he thought most apt to the occasion, and this he did. Writing what he would on a paper, he gathered an assembly of the Persians, and then unfolded the paper and declared that therein Astiaghis appointed him leader of the Persian armies. Now, said he in his speech, I bid you all, men of Persia, to come each of you with a sickle. There are many tribes in Persia. Those of them whom Cyrus assembled and persuaded to revolt from the Medes were the Pasargadae, the Marafii, and the Maspii. On these hang all the other Persians. The chief tribe is that of the Parasgadae. To them belongs the clan of the Achaemenidae, the royal house of Persia. The other Persian tribes are the Panthialai, the Derusii, and the Germanii, all tillers of the soil, and the Dai, the Mardi, the Drabiki, the Sagartii, all wandering herdsmen. So Cyrus gets the message from Harpagus, and he's in. He's like, all right, let's do this. Let's raise an army and march against Astiaghis. So he assembles all these tribes of the Persians to get them to rally to his cause. But he doesn't tell them that yet. He's going to put them to test first. So when they all came with sickles as commanded, Cyrus bade them clear and make serviceable in one day a certain thorny tract of Persia, of 18 or 20 furlongs each way in extent. A furlong's about an eighth of a mile. So 18 or 20 furlongs each way, or in a square, it's about 6 square miles. The Persians accomplished the appointed task. Cyrus then commanded them to wash themselves and come on the next day. And meanwhile, gathering together his father's goats and sheep and oxen in one place, he slew and prepared them as a feast for the Persian host, providing also wine and all foods that were most suitable. When the Persians came on the next day, he made them sit and feast in a meadow. After dinner, he asked them which pleased them best, their task of yesterday or their present state. They answered that the difference was great. All yesterday they had naught but evil, today naught but good. Then taking their word from their mouths, Cyrus laid bare all his purpose and said, "This is your case, men of Persia. Obey me, and you shall have these good things and 10,000 others besides, with no toil and slavery. But if you will not obey me, you will have labors unnumbered, like to the toil of yesterday. Now, therefore, do as I bid you, and win your freedom. For I think that I myself was born by a marvelous providence to take this work in hand, and I deem you full as good men as the Medes in war and all else. All this is true, wherefore now revolt from Astiaghis with all speed." So he sets before them in a sort of divine type of manner, life and death, as it were. Good things and plenty, or slavery and toil. Do you guys want to live under the rule of the Medes and have this life of toil, or would you rather follow me and enjoy all the good things which we will plunder? And this is pretty classic political rhetoric right here. How do you get a whole bunch of people to risk their lives to follow you? Well, you promise them that you're going to solve their problems, make their life awesome. The Persians had long been ill content that the Medes should rule them, and now, having got them a champion, they were glad to win their freedom. But when Astiaghis heard that Cyrus was at this business, he sent a messenger to summon him. Cyrus bade the messenger bring back word that Astiaghis would see him sooner than he desired. Hearing this, Astiaghis armed all his Medians, and was so infatuated that he forgot what he had done to Harpagus, and appointed him to command the army. So no sooner had the Medes marched out and joined battle with the Persians than some of them deserted to the enemy. But most of them, of set purpose, played the coward and fled. Those only fought who had not shared Harpagus's counsels. Right, so the Median army goes out to meet the Persians. Some of the Medes revolt, and they break ranks and head over to the Persian side. Most of them end up just leaving. So they were under Harpagus's command, and they were already tracking all this. They weren't planning on fighting for Astiaghis. But to make a good show of it, they didn't desert, they just retreated. And only a few left to fight. Those are the guys who remained loyal to Astiaghis and who had not been part of Harpagus's plots. Thus the Median army was foully scattered. Astiaghis, hearing this, sent a threatening message to Cyrus that even so he should not go unpunished. And with that he took the Magians who interpreted dreams and had persuaded him to let Cyrus go free, and impaled them. Then he armed the Medes who were left in the city, the youths and old men. Leading these out and encountering the Persians, he was worsted. Astiaghis himself was taken prisoner and lost the Median army which he had led. So once again, this is the fault of the dream interpreters, the oracles. So Astiaghis first puts them to death for saying that Cyrus probably wasn't a big deal. He'd already been elected king by the boys, and that's what the dream meant. So he kills those guys. Then he heads out into battle and loses. But I did want to point out that even though in this war, the might of Media was not broken. Remember, most of the Medes ended up not fighting in this battle. Only a few of them fought. And even after Astiaghis raises this other army of old and young men, they're defeated. But the bulk of the manpower of the Median military is still intact, but it's under Harpagus' command, and now it's under Cyrus. He being then a captive, Harpagus came and exulted over him and taunted him, and with much other bitter mockery he brought to mind his banquet, which when Astiaghis had fed Harpagus on his son's flesh, and asked Astiaghis what it was to be a slave after having been a king. Fixing his gaze on Harpagus, Astiaghis asked, "Think you that this, which Cyrus has done, is your work?" "It was I," said the other, "who wrote the letter. The accomplishment of the work is justly mine." "Then," said Astiaghis, "you stand confessed the most foolish and most unjust man on earth, most foolish in giving another the throne which you might have had for yourself, if the present business be indeed your doing, most unjust, in enslaving the Medes by reason of that banquet. For if at all hazards another, and not yourself, must possess the royal power, then in justice some Mede should enjoy it, not a Persian. But now you have made the Medes, who did you no harm, slaves instead of masters, and the Persians, who were the slaves, are now the masters of the Medes." Thus Astiaghis was deposed from his sovereignty after a reign of 35 years, and the Medians were made to bow down before the Persians by reason of Astiaghis' cruelty. They had ruled all Asia beyond the Halys for 128 years, from which must be taken the time when the Scythians held sway. Remember, that was a period of, I believe, 28 years. At a latter time they repented of what they now did, and rebelled against Darius, but they were defeated in battle and brought back into subjection. But now, in Astiaghis' time, Cyrus and the Persians rose in revolt against the Medes, and from this time ruled Asia. As for Astiaghis, Cyrus did him no further harm, and kept him in his own house till Astiaghis died. This is the story of the birth and upbringing of Cyrus, and thus he became king. And afterwards, as I have already related, he subdued Croesus in punishment for the unprovoked wrong done him, and after this victory he became sovereign of all Asia. As to the usages of the Persians, I know them to be these. It is not their custom to make and set up statues and temples and altars, but those who make such they deem foolish, as I suppose, because they never believe the gods, as do the Greeks, to be in the likeness of men, but they call the whole circle of heaven Zeus, and to him they offer sacrifice on the highest peaks of the mountains. They sacrifice also to the sun and the moon and earth and fire and water and winds. These are the only gods to whom they have ever sacrificed from the beginning. They have learned later to sacrifice to the heavenly Aphrodite, from the Assyrians and Arabians. She is called by the Assyrians Malita, by the Arabians Alilat, and by the Persians Mitra. So speaking of the Persian custom, they are sort of technically polytheists, but they're not polytheists in the way the Greeks are. They view the whole cosmos, the universe itself, that's what he refers to as the circle of heaven. The cosmos itself is divine. And they sacrifice to sun and moon and earth and fire and water and winds. These are sort of natural philosophical principles. So their religion is based more on the powers of the cosmos, which are not as personified in Persia as they were among the Greeks. And this is their fashion of sacrifice to the aforesaid gods. When about to sacrifice, they neither build altars nor kindle fire. They use no libations, nor music, nor fillets, nor barley meal. But to whomsoever of the gods a man will sacrifice, he leads the beast to an open space, and then calls on the god, himself wearing a wreath on his cap of myrtle for choice. To pray for blessings for himself alone is not lawful for the sacrificer. Rather he prays that it may be well with the king and all the Persians, for he reckons himself among them. He then cuts the victim limb from limb into portions, and having boiled the flesh, spreads the softest grass, trefoil by choice, and places all of it on this. When he has so disposed it, a Magian comes near and chants over it the song of the birth of the gods, as the Persian tradition relates it, for no sacrifice can be offered without a Magian. Then after a little while the sacrificer carries away the flesh and uses it as he pleases. Now this is a little bit different than what we know of ancient Persian Zoroastrian religion, because he specifically mentions that they don't build altars or kindle fire, but in fact in Zoroastrianism, the sort of native religion of Persia, fire is a crucial part of their religion. They have fire temples, and they keep a flame burning perpetually. The priests of the temple have the job of making sure the fire never goes out. And some of the fires have been burning for incredibly long periods of time. So it's a little bit difficult to make sense of what Herodotus is relating here. Perhaps some of the tribes had some different customs that are less familiar to us than what we might think of as mainstream Zoroastrian Persian religion. But he points out that in their religious rites, they do require a Magi to be present and officiate. So that's similar to the priesthood that exists currently in Zoroastrianism. And they do offer sacrifice. And it's not lawful to pray for individual blessing. You have to pray for collective blessing for all the Persians and for the king. It's an interesting note. The day which every man most honors is his own birthday. On this he thinks it right to serve a more abundant meal than on other days. Before the rich are set oxen or horses or camels or asses, roasted whole in ovens. The poorer serve up the lesser kinds of cattle. Their courses are few, the dainties that follow are many, and not all served together. This is why the Persians say of the Greeks that they rise from the table still hungry, because not much dessert is set before them. Were this too given to the Greek, said the Persians, he would never cease eating. They are greatly given to wine. None may vomit or make water in another's presence. This, then, is prohibited among them. Moreover, it is their custom to deliberate about the gravest matters when they are drunk, and what they approve in their councils is proposed to them the next day by the master of the house where they deliberate, when they are now sober. And if being sober they still approve it, they act thereon, but if not, they cast it aside. And when they have taken counsel about a matter when sober, they decide upon it when they are drunk. So he mentions a contrast here between the Persians and the Greeks. The Greeks, they had a cultural value for moderation in eating, and they were very sensitive to medicine and health, what they called hygia, which is basically proportionality, everything in proper proportion. And that means you don't eat too much, you don't eat too little, you eat the right types of things. This was a very important Greek idea, and the Persians thought that was funny. The Persians were given to overeating, essentially. They have these big feasts and they eat all the dainties and stuff. And so they have a bit of a laughing attitude towards the Greeks, rising from the table still hungry. And they also have a peculiar decision-making method here where they all get together, they get drunk, they discuss their plan, they make a plan, and then they all go to bed. Then in the morning they wake up, and when they're all sober, they look at the plan again. And if it still seems like a good idea to them, they're like, all right, that's an awesome idea. It holds up in the light of day. And they go ahead and implement that plan. When one man meets another in the way, it is easy to see if the two are equals. For then without speaking they kiss each other on the lips, if the difference in rank be but little. It is the cheek that is kissed. If it be great, the humbler bows down and does obeisance to the other. They honor most of all those who dwell nearest them, next those who are next farthest removed, and so going ever onwards they assign honor by this rule. Those who dwell farthest off they hold least honorable of all, for they deem themselves to be in all regards by far the best of all men, the rest to have but a proportionate claim to merit, till those who dwell farthest away have least merit of all. Under the rule of the Medes, one tribe would even govern another. The Medes held sway over all alike, and specially over those who dwelt nearest to themselves. These ruled their neighbors, and the neighbors again those who came next to them, and on the same plan whereby the Persians assign honor. For according as the Median nation advanced its dominion farther from home, such was the measure of its rule and suzerainty. He equates the Medes here with a quality which was actually also very much known to be the case for the Greeks. That is, that they believe themselves to be the most honorable of all people, and sort of the further removed you are from themselves, the lower type of person you were. But of all men, the Persians most welcome foreign customs. They wear the Median dress, deeming it to be more beautiful than their own, and the Egyptian cuirass in war. Their luxurious practices are of all kinds, and all borrowed. The Greeks taught them unnatural vices. Every Persian marries many lawful wives, and keeps still more concubines. So the Persians are not xenophobic in the way the Greeks were. They're very welcoming of foreign customs. They prefer the Median dress since it's more elegant than their own trousers and tunics. And they import all kinds of stuff from other countries and other cultures. After valor in battle, it is most reckoned as manly merit to show the greatest number of sons. The king sends gifts yearly to him who can show most. Numbers, they hold, are strength. They educate their boys from 5 to 20 years old and teach them 3 things only: riding, archery, and truth-telling. A boy is not seen by his father before he is 5 years old, but lives with the women. The reason of this is that if the boy should die in the time of his rearing, the father may suffer no dolor. This is a law which I praise, and it is a praiseworthy law too, which suffers not the king himself to slay any man for one offense, nor any other Persian for one offense to do incurable harm to one of his servants. Not till reckoning shows that the offender's wrongful acts are more and greater than his services, may a man give vent to his anger. They say that none has ever yet killed his father or mother. When such like deeds have been done, it cannot be but that an inquest made the doers shown to be a child falsely substituted, or born of a concubine, for it is not to be believed, say they, that a son should kill his true parent. So among their praiseworthy customs are that they seem to be culturally patient. They are not just going to kill a man for one offense, but rather they will judge his merit as aggregate. Is his behavior just consistently bad, or is he a good servant who made a mistake? Is he a good person who did one thing wrong? And that seems to be characteristic of them for the most part. Although we have seen that when they are moved to wrath, they can be very decisive. They can just put people to death almost on a whim. But this trait does seem to be noticeable, and I would even mention it in the Bible, in the book of Daniel, when they're dealing with the Persian kings. It does seem to be a bit of a trait that they're not just going to willy-nilly decide to kill whoever did something they don't like. They're going to give it a little bit more consideration and judge things in bigger picture terms. Moreover, of what they may not do, neither may they speak. They hold lying to be foulest of all, and next to that debt, for which they have many other reasons, but this in especial, that the debtor must needs, so they say, speak some falsehood. The citizen who has leprosy or the white sickness may not come into a town or consort with other Persians. They say that he is so afflicted because he has sinned in some wise against the sun. Many drive every stranger who takes such a disease out of the country, and so they do to white doves, for the reason foresaid. Rivers they chiefly reverence. They will neither make water, nor spit, nor wash their hands therein, nor suffer anyone to do so. So the Persians hate lying, and they hate debt, usury, and they reverence rivers. There is another thing which always happens among them. We have noted it, though the Persians have not. Their names, which agree with the nature of their persons and their nobility, all end in the same letter. That which the Dorians call san, and the Ionians sigma. You shall find, if you search, that not some, but all Persian names alike end in this letter. So Herodotus believed that all Persian names end in S, like Xerxes, Darius, Cyrus, and so on. And indeed, this is most often the case. He's not quite correct. There are a few exceptions that do exist, which show up in some of the textual references, but Herodotus seems to have not been aware of these. So much I can say of them of my own certain knowledge, but there are other matters concerning the dead, which are secretly and obscurely told, how the dead bodies of Persians are not buried before they have been mangled by bird or dog. That this is the way of the Magians I know for a certainty, for they do not conceal the practice. But this is certain, that before the Persians bury the body in earth, they embalm it in wax. These Magians are much unlike to the priests of Egypt, as to all other men, for the priests count it a sacrilege to kill aught that lives, save what they sacrifice. But the Magians kill with their own hands every creature, save only dogs and men. They kill all alike, ants and snakes, creeping and flying things, and take much pride therein. Leaving this custom to be such as it has been from the first, I return now to my former story. So what he's referring to with leaving the dead bodies to be mangled by a bird or dog, that actually continued all the way up to modern times in Persia. They build these silos called towers of silence, and basically, rather than burying the bodies, they carry corpses to the top of this tower and they leave them up there exposed to the air. And the birds kind of pick the flesh off their bones, and then there's a grating, or the top of the tower sloped down towards a central container, essentially. And so once all the bones have been stripped, they either fall through the grate or they slide down into the container. And this is a practice which is mentioned by a number of other ancient authors like Agathios and Strabo. And he also makes mention of how different the Magians were from the Egyptian priests. And the Egyptian priests and Hindu priests and many of this sort of enlightened class in ancient times, they would have had a very reverential respect for animal life. They would probably have avoided killing anything whenever possible, as he mentions here. They don't kill anything except the animals they sacrifice in the rituals. The Magi, he says, these are wise men. These are people who understand dreams and visions and spiritual world. But he says, but they seem to kill everything indiscriminately. They won't kill men or dogs, but they'll kill anything else, and they enjoy it. So it's worth mentioning. It's a very interesting trait here, and I'm not aware of that particular element of Magi culture being transmitted anywhere else.